May 15th, 2017, as Javier Valdez was murdered in Sinaloa. Another hit unfolded in Jalisco. Sonia Cordova and her son, Jonathan Rodriguez, were ambushed in their car as bullets tore through glass and flesh in a brutal, coordinated strike, changing the course of their lives for the worse. Here's some activists messing with the wrong cartels.
I was thinking about my own sisters. I was like, what would I do, if my sisters disappeared one day? Like, would I have the balls to do what Marisella and her family did? Would I stay quiet? Would I just let it go?
December 16th, 2010. Just outside the governor's palace in Chihuahua, Mexico, a woman stood holding a handmade sign. Her name was Marisella Escobedo Ortiz, and for months, she'd been protesting right there on the steps, demanding justice for her murdered daughter. That night, a man in a hood walks up to her, pulls out a gun, and shoots her point blank in the head, on the palace steps, in front of surveillance cameras. No one stops him, no one chases him, because by then everyone knew Marisella had messed with the wrong cartel. It all started in 2008, when Maricella's daughter, Ruby, went missing. Days later, Ruby's charred remains were found dumped in a trash heap. The suspect? Ruby's older boyfriend, Sergio Barraza, a member of Los Zetas, one of the most brutal cartels in Mexico. But Marisella wasn't that kind of mother to back away in fear. She wouldn't just cry and light candles. She launched a one-woman crusade across the country, tracking down Sergio herself, confronting authorities, and even convincing the military to arrest him. In court, Sergio confessed to murdering Ruby, and you'd think that'd be the end of it. But somehow, thanks to cartel intimidation and a system rotting from the inside, he was acquitted. The judges claimed there wasn't enough evidence. Despite his own confession, Marisella snapped. She turned her pain into rage and her rage into protest. She camps outside the government buildings, gave some interviews, and shouted at politicians on live TV. She called out the names of corrupt judges. She exposed the links between cartels and law enforcement. And as she got louder, the threats got more real. But she didn't stop. She refused to stop. And that's when Los Zetas made their move. On that freezing December night in 2010, as she stood alone with her sign, they silenced her, the only way they know how. A Sicario had pulled the trigger, likely hired by Sergio himself, who'd vanished back into the underworld. Maricella's assassination shocked the country, but it wasn't just about one grieving mother anymore. Her death had symbolized something much bigger. What happens when you demand justice in a place where justice is bought, sold, and buried? She had no gun, no army, just a mother's love and a terrifying amount of courage. But in cartel territory, even that can get you killed.
Javier Valdez's murder, just one block from his office, has shocked the journalist community. He was known for his work covering drug trafficking and organized crime in the northern state of Sinaloa.
May 15th, 2017. It was just after noon in Culiacan when Javier Valdez stepped out of the Rio Doce office for what should have been a routine walk to his car. Minutes later, his lifeless body lay face down in the street, riddled with 12 bullets. His phone was still in his pocket, his wallet untouched. They hadn't come to rob him. They came to silence him. To understand why, you gotta know who Javier was and how deeply he'd messed with the wrong cartel. Javier Valdez Cárdenas wasn't just a journalist, but a man who made a career out of looking death in the face and daring it to blink. Born in Culiacan, Sinaloa, ground zero for Mexico's drug war, Javier didn't report from the sidelines. He jumped straight into cartel country, pen in hand, spine straight, writing about drug lords, disappearances, and the people caught in the middle of the bloodshed. In 2003, he co-founded Rio Doce, a weekly newspaper that refused to play it safe. You see, other outlets were either bought off or maybe too afraid to speak up. Rio Doce here named names. And when El Chapo's criminal empire began to fracture, especially the brutal infighting between El Chapo's sons and Damaso Lopez Nunez, aka El Licenciado, Javier reported every bloody detail. And that's where things got dangerous. He wrote about Damaso's betrayal, about how the cartel was cannibalizing itself, about the players, the killers, and rising paranoia. His stories didn't just inform, they threatened to expose internal weaknesses, shake up loyalties within a billion-dollar criminal machine. And in the cartel world, a journalist digging too deep like that is a liability. On the day of his murder, Javier was forced out of his car in broad daylight. No struggle, no resistance, just cold efficiency. His killers didn't need a warning shot. They were the warning. Later investigations pointed the finger squarely at Damaso's faction. They saw Javier as a threat, someone who knew too much, someone who dared to write what others whispered about in fear. And so the cartels do what they do best, made him disappear, permanently. But even in death, Javier's voice did not vanish. His books, like narco-journalism, are still quoted. His legacy still breathes. His murder became a symbol of the war on truth in Mexico, where telling the wrong story to the wrong people can cost you everything. Javier Valdez dared the wrong cartel, knowing full well what it might cost. And he did it anyway. May 15th, 2017. The same day Javier Valdez was gunned down in Sinaloa, another ambush was taking shape in Jalisco. Sonia Cordova, the deputy director of the regional newspaper El Costeño, was riding in her car with her 26-year-old son, Jonathan Rodriguez, when a vehicle pulls alongside him. Within seconds, a storm of bullets shattered the windows and riddled their bodies with lead. Jonathan died right there in the passenger seat. Sonia, bleeding out, barely conscious, somehow survived. But the warning was unmistakable. They tangled with the wrong cartel. Now, Sonia wasn't a crime reporter in the traditional sense. She didn't chase gunfights nor write exposés on drug lords, but her paper, El Costeño, had this reputation for covering sensitive topics, organized crime being one of them, political corruption, cartel-related violence. And in Jalisco, that's a tightrope walk over a pit of vipers. You see, this ain't just any region. It's CJ&G territory. That's the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, and it happens to be one of the most violent, rapidly expanding cartels in the country. Known for paramilitary tactics, armored convoys, and public executions, CJ&G has zero tolerance for scrutiny. You don't write about them, and you definitely don't question them. So, when El Costeño starts publishing pieces that highlight cartel activity, especially the impact on civilians, it didn't go unnoticed. Cartels aren't always after investigative journalists. Sometimes it's enough just to exist in their shadow and speak too loudly. Jonathan, Sonia's son, wasn't even a full-time reporter. This guy was studying communications and occasionally helped out with writing and editing. He wasn't the target, but he was collateral damage. A young man in the wrong place, with the wrong name, at the wrong time. And after the shooting, whispers quickly circulated. CJ&G was behind the hit. No official confirmation ever came, just silence. Because that's how it works. You can be shot in broad daylight in the middle of a city, and no one's talking. The attack sent chills throughout Mexico's media world. 2 journalists ambushed in different states on the same day. Coordinated? Maybe. But the message was unmistakable. Covering the truth, even quietly, comes at a deadly cost. Sonia lived, but her survival came with the weight of unbearable grief. She lost her son, her partner in journalism, and whatever illusion she had that telling the truth was safe in cartel territory. Sonia Cordova and Jonathan Rodriguez weren't chasing glory. They were just telling stories. But in Mexico, that can be seen as a threat. And for that, they paid dearly.
Y también en el Estado de México, autoridades informaron que esta mañana fue hallado el cuerpo del periodista David Condes Jaramillo en el municipio de Tejupilco.
August 24th, 2019. In a quiet area of Tejupilco, Mexico, locals stumble upon a gruesome scene. David Condes Jaramillo's body lay in the dirt, stabbed repeatedly. His throat had been slit. No gunshots, no hurried ambush. Just a brutal personal killing. like they wanted him to feel it, like they wanted him to know who was in charge. And by all accounts, Nevith knew. He had been expecting him, because he'd messed with the wrong cartel, and he'd done it publicly. Nevith wasn't a flashy journalist. He didn't chase drug lords nor break national stories. What he did was arguably even more dangerous. He talked about the local problems cartels caused in small towns. Through his online outlet, El Observatorio del Sur, he'd covered everyday corruption, cartel intimidation, and even the suffocating fear that crept into his community like smoke. But worst of all, he named names. This guy wasn't hiding behind a desk either. Nevith ran his platform almost single-handedly. He filmed, edited, published videos calling out local governments and organized crime. He was a voice for a place most national reporters ignored. And in cartel country, being that kind of voice is like painting a target on your own back. Nevith had received death threats for months. He even seeks help from Mexico's Federal Protection Mechanism for Journalists, a program meant to safeguard reporters under threat. But that system failed him. He was left exposed, vulnerable, and fully aware of the wolves circling him. Now, one of these threats came after he reported on the Cartel del Sur, a lesser-known but fiercely violent group operating in the region. He dared to call out their infiltration of local government contracts, their extortion schemes, and their recruitment. That sealed his fate. They wouldn't come for him guns a-blazing. Oh no, they took him somewhere quiet, somewhere isolated, somewhere they could take their time. His murder sent shockwaves throughout the community, but because it was becoming so normal, Nevith was the 12th journalist killed in Mexico that year alone. 12 in 8 months. No arrests, no convictions, just another name added to the list. Nevith Condes Aramillo didn't die chasing a headline. This guy defended the truth in a town no one else was watching. A man with a camera and a conscience who refused to stay silent. But as we know now in cartel territory, that's all it takes.
Early in the morning, she was taking her son, a 10-year-old, to school, and she was shot 8 times, very, very viciously.
March 23rd, 2017. It was early morning in Chihuahua City. Miritolava Bri, a respected journalist, was pulling out of her driveway with her teenage son in the passenger seat when a man walks up and opens fire. 8 bullets through the windshield. She dies instantly. Her son survived, but nothing about that morning was random. Because Miritolava had dared to write the truth. Now, she wasn't just any journalist. Miritolava was known all over Mexico for her fearless reporting in major outlets like La Jornada and El Norte de Juarez. Her focus was on corruption, cartels, and the toxic marriage between organized crime and politics. Now, what made her especially dangerous to the people in power was her precision. I mean, she didn't deal in rumors. She dealt in names, dates, and evidence. One of her last stories talked about how the Sinaloa cartel embedded candidates into local elections, handpicking mayors to serve them. And she proved it. In a piece that shook the region, she laid out how the narcos were infiltrating the PRI and PAN political parties, naming names, showing documents, connecting the dots others were way too afraid to touch. Oh, the backlash came fast. Anonymous threats, men in trucks tailing her movements, and then calls telling her to stop digging or she'd be buried herself. But this woman refused to back down. She kept writing and exposing, telling stories of families crushed by the violence and communities overrun by fear. Because to her, journalism wasn't just a job. It was a form of resistance. A pen would be her weapon, and boy was she not afraid to use it. The investigation into her murder eventually led to a chilling discovery. Her killer, Juan Carlos Moreno, alias El Ladi, was a cartel enforcer for Los Salazar, a faction of the Sinaloa cartel. But more disturbingly, local politicians had helped orchestrate the hit. One of the men she exposed in her reporting was caught on tape discussing how Miritolava messed everything up. She was silenced, not just by narcos here, but by the very people meant to protect her. Her death lit a firestorm of outrage. International organizations would demand justice. Fellow reporters protested in the streets. But justice in cartel country moves really slow, if it even moves at all. Now, R Deree was convicted in 2020, but most of the powerful guys behind that murder walked away untouched. Miritolava Bri fought a war of words in a world ruled by bullets. She exposed a system built on fear, and she paid for it with her life. But her voice, it still echoes.
Well, the trial begins today of two men suspected of murdering the prominent Dutch journalist Peter R Deree. He was shot at close range in Amsterdam last year and died 9 days later.
July 6th, 2021. Peter R Deree steps outside of a TV studio in Amsterdam, walks down the street, and right into a hail of bullets. 5 shots with one to the head. He collapses face down on the pavement as bystanders scream and cameras roll. This wasn't just an assassination, this was a statement. Because Peter had done what most wouldn't dare. He took on the Mocro Mafia, a violent drug trafficking network with deep cartel ties stretching from the Netherlands to South America. Now, Peter R. wasn't your average crime reporter. For decades, he'd been a household name in the Netherlands, known for cracking cold cases, confronting killers on air, and even helping families find justice. This guy wasn't reporting news, he was in it. A one-man army with a mic, a pen, and nerves of steel. But in 2021, Peter crossed a line few had ever dared. He became the advisor and spokesperson for Nabil Bakali, a key witness set to testify against Ridwan Taghi, the alleged kingpin of the Mocro Mafia. This isn't some small-time drug boss. Taghi's one of Europe's most wanted men, accused of ordering assassinations like a CEO, signing off on emails. Just by standing next to Bakali, Peter became a target, and he knew it. This wasn't the first time someone close to Bakali had been killed. Back in 2018, his brother was also gunned down, and then in 2019, his lawyer, Dirk Wiersum, was executed outside his home. It was pretty clear. Anyone helping out Bakali would be hunted down. But Peter didn't flinch. He once said,
"On bended knee is no way to be free."
And he lived that to the end. So when he was shot just steps from the studio, it shocked the world. But it didn't surprise those who knew the stakes. The hit bore the hallmarks of a professional job. A 21-year-old gunman and a getaway driver were arrested hours later. But everyone knew the real mastermind was still pulling strings from prison. Peter died 9 days later, and his death hit the Netherlands like a thunderclap. He stood not just as a journalist, but as the guiding conscience of his people. A man who held the powerful accountable and gave victims a voice. He messed with the wrong syndicate, but he never apologized for it. Because Peter R Deree believed truth was worth dying for, and in doing so, he became something more than a journalist. He became a symbol.
Today we're going to be in conversation about one of those journalists, Regina Martinez Perez, who was murdered in her home state of Veracruz in 2012. She was one of several journalists around that time who were also murdered in the state of Veracruz.
April 28, 2012, in Jalapa, Veracruz. A neighbor noticed Regina's door was left slightly open, which was pretty unusual and unsettling. And when they stepped inside, what they found wasn't just horrifying, but a bloody warning. Regina Martinez Perez, one of Mexico's boldest investigative journalists, lay dead. She'd been and beaten as the tiny house was in disarray. But the message wasn't about a robbery. Again, it's about silence. And Regina refused to be silent. For over a decade, she worked with Proceso, a fiercely independent news magazine. Regina had made a name for herself by fearlessly reporting what no one else would touch: the deep, murky intersection of drug cartels and corrupt politicians in Veracruz. And Veracruz isn't just your ordinary cartel country, but a war zone, where journalists drop like flies and authorities barely flinch. Regina wasn't naive. She knew exactly what she was risking every time she hit publish. In fact, the week she died, she was reporting on high-level corruption and the arrest of cartel-linked officials, stories that dug straight into the rotting core of local power. So when police would announce a suspect days after her death, someone who allegedly killed her over a botched robbery, her colleagues and press freedom groups immediately cried foul. The confession was suspicious, the motive flimsy, and the forensic evidence didn't even match the guy. But the state closes the case and they bury it, just like Regina. But you see, the thing is, you can't bury the truth forever. Years later, this independent investigation led by international watchdogs peel the lid off the case. They find glaring inconsistencies. Witnesses ignored, evidence mishandled, lines of inquiry, especially those pointing to her journalism, shut down. The warning couldn't have been more obvious. Regina was targeted for her work, and those in power had no interest in justice. But it wasn't just about Regina. Her death sent a signal to every journalist in Mexico. If you look too closely, we'll come for you too. And they have. Mexico remains one of the deadliest countries for journalists outside a war zone. Regina's name is just one in a long list, but it is a name that still echoes. Because she did mess with the wrong people, not just a cartel, but a cartel-backed political machine. And though they try to silence her, what she uncovered continues to haunt those who ordered her death. Regina once wrote, "So people will know what's really happening." She paid the price for that truth, but she never stopped telling it. January 20th, 2007. In Villahermosa, Mexico, Rodolfo Rincon Tarasena didn't show up to work that day. Now, he had a reputation for being punctual and dependable, even when stories got hot. So when he went missing, his colleagues at the Basco Hoy knew something was seriously wrong. Rodolfo wasn't just any crime reporter here. For years, he was writing these bold, fearless pieces about drug cartels operating in Tabasco. Not the safe secondhand reporting that some others do, but some on-the-ground investigations on raids, money laundering, kidnappings, and extortion. He followed the violence like a bloodhound and made sure that the public knew exactly who was behind it. But unfortunately for him, the cartels noticed. I mean, why wouldn't they? In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Rodolfo had been looking into something especially dangerous: the Zetas. At the time, they were expanding ruthlessly across southeastern Mexico. Rodolfo had even written about secret narco houses being used by that cartel, including one that was later raided by authorities just days after he filed that story. It may have been this story that sealed his fate. You see, after leaving his office that night, Rodolfo vanished. No witnesses, no ransom demand, nothing. It was like the earth had swallowed him whole. But whispers spread quickly. Some say he was abducted by the Zetas. Others claimed he was tortured, his laptop and camera seized, his reporting used to figure out who had been leaking cartel secrets. It'd be months before authorities confirmed what everyone feared. Rodolfo had been killed and buried in a clandestine grave alongside other victims of cartel violence. He'd been brutally executed for doing his job too well. Rodolfo's death shakes the journalism community yet again. Not just in Tabasco, but across Mexico. Reporters are being threatened, silenced, or even bought off. But killing Rodolfo sent a brutal message. Even the boldest truth-tellers weren't untouchable. The cartels aren't just running drugs, they're erasing stories. And yet, his legacy remains powerful. In life, Rodolfo exposed the darkest corners of a broken system. In death, he becomes a symbol of journalistic bravery. His name appears on walls, plaques, and international press freedom tributes. But maybe the most haunting tribute is this. To this day, his last story remains unfinished, like a warning frozen in time. Rodolfo Rincon Tarasena messed with the wrong cartel, but in doing so, he exposed how fragile truth becomes when fear wins. And this man did not back down, even when he knew what was coming.
No recuerdo mucho de mi padre ni de mi vida previo al 22 de junio de 2004. Sé que era un padre cariñoso, un esposo atento, un hijo proveedor. entregado a su trabajo, lo que en ocasiones no le proporcionaba mucha disponibilidad durante la semana laboral, pero siempre estuvo dispuesto a hacer valer los fines de semana con su familia.
June 22nd, 2004, Tijuana, Mexico. Francisco Ortiz Franco had just picked up his 2 kids from a doctor's appointment. It was a quick stop, pretty routine, and he parks his white Nissan in front of a pharmacy, steps out to grab something, and within seconds, gunfire shattered everything. 2 men approach, calm and methodical, as they aim straight at Francisco and open fire, killing him instantly. His poor children still in the car watched this horror as it happened. But let's rewind a little bit, because, again, this wasn't a random hit. Francisco here was no ordinary man, but a co-founder and editor of Zeta, a fearless weekly magazine based in Tijuana, known for doing the one thing that most others again wouldn't do: expose drug cartels by name. For years, Zeta had been a thorn in the side of organized crime. Francisco's reporting covered the Arellano Felix cartel, an empire of violence and corruption rooted in Tijuana's underworld. He would write about their murders, their money, and the law enforcement officials that were in their pocket. And he wasn't even anonymous about it either. His byline was right there, every time. And that's exactly what made him a target. In the weeks before he died, Francisco was working on explosive stories tying cartel leaders to high-ranking officials. This guy was connecting dots powerful people didn't want connected. And the fact was that Zeta had already suffered. Another editor, Héctor Felix Miranda, was assassinated in 1988. Man, Francisco knew the risks, but he also believed that his silence was his surrender. After his murder, the shockwaves were massive. Again, not just in Tijuana, but internationally. Francisco's killing was seen as an outright assault on press freedom. His colleagues at Zeta were devastated, but not deterred. They published the story Francisco had been working on after his death, naming cartel members he'd investigated. It was their way of honoring him and sending a message. Yeah, you can kill the messenger, but not the message. Of course, the justice system moves like molasses, and years later, a suspect linked to the Arellano Felix cartel was finally convicted. But again, many believe the real masterminds are still out there because that's how cartel killings work. Clean, fast, and mostly unanswered. Francisco Ortiz Franco messed with the wrong cartel, but if you ask his fellow reporters, they'll tell you he knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was chasing truth in a place where truth gets buried fast. And sometimes, so do the people who speak it. Even now, Zeta continues its work. Francisco's legacy lives in bold headlines, and every risky investigation that dares to print the names others whisper. Because he showed them how. August 9th, 2006, Chihuahua, Mexico. A body's found dumped in the desert. His hands are bound with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. No ID, no witnesses. Just a brutal message that someone wanted him silenced. This man was Enrique Perea Quintanilla, and he knew deep down that this day might come. Enrique wasn't your average reporter here. He wasn't tiptoeing around the truth nor dancing around cartel names. He was another one charging headfirst into some of the most dangerous territory in Mexico. Organized crime and political corruption, and publishing names in bold. Enrique had worked as a crime reporter for El Heraldo de Chihuahua and El Diario de Chihuahua, 2 of the region's major papers. But he got tired of editorial restrictions, of being told what he could and couldn't say. So in 2005, he went rogue, launching his own magazine called Dos Caras, Una Verdad, 2 faces, 1 truth. The name wasn't accidental. He was exposing the double lives of public figures, judges, politicians, cops, people who looked clean on the outside, but were really dirty behind closed doors. And it wasn't just speculation either. Enrique published hard-hitting pieces connecting powerful people to drug cartels, kidnappings, and murders. And in places like Chihuahua, that kind of reporting is, again, practically a death sentence. In the days leading up to his death, Enrique had reportedly been investigating the murder of a state police commander and digging into the secrets of high-ranking government officials. His last issue on Dos Caras was especially bold, the kind that makes enemies in powerful places. It wouldn't take long for the threats to start rolling in. But Enrique wasn't the type to back down. He told his family,
"If they kill me, it's because of what I published."
And then he vanished. His family filed a missing persons report. A few days later, they get the call. His body had been found outside the city, tortured and executed in classic cartel style. Authorities were quick to suggest personal motives, a bad deal, a grudge, anything but his journalism. But his fellow reporters and watchdog groups weren't buying it. They believed, and still believe, Enrique was targeted because he was onto something way too big. Something that he hit too close to the heart of power in Chihuahua. And to this day, no one's been held accountable for anything. Dos Caras ceased publication shortly after, and Enrique became yet another name on Mexico's long, painful list of journalists silenced for doing their job. But his work, man, it didn't vanish. His stories are still cited, his courage still remembered. Because Enrique Perea Quintanilla wasn't just reporting the truth. This guy was risking everything to print it. And in the end, that's exactly what got him killed.